Most conversations about masculinity today skip over the one thing every engineer knows it's non negotiable, and this is system design. People say things like, just be confident, just be disciplined, just be grounded. But confidence is not a personality trait. Discipline is not a mood. Grounding is not a vibe. They're all outputs of an internal architecture. And here is the uncomfortable truth. For the first time in our history, men are trying to carry adult loads with no internal frame, no skeleton, no defined structure. This video is not about how to act masculine. It's about how to engineer a load-bearing masculinity by building the architecture that makes stability possible. Before we go deeper, I'd like to point out something that almost no one mentions. When masculinity is discussed today, it's treated as performance. Stand tall, be more focused, control your emotions, lead with confidence. But identity is not a starting point. Identity is the end result of a system with structure, with boundaries, with feedback loops, with defined failure modes, and with load ratings. Most men don't lack motivations. What they lack is architecture. In engineering, if you put weight on a structure without understanding the load path of the support, then failure isn't dramatic, it's actually predictable. What we are doing in this series is something you don't really hear in the mainstream masculinity content. We are teaching men how to think, how to diagnose stability issues, how to understand the load they're failing under, and how to redesign themselves with engineering logic. Because once you understand your own structure, you don't need someone to tell you how to be a man. You can reason through it from first principles. In 1907, during the construction of the Quebec Bridge, this bridge was designed to be one of the longest cantilever bridges of its time in the world. The structure collapsed. It wasn't because the workers were careless, because the weather was unusual. It failed because the architecture could not support the load. The steel members were thinner than predictable, and the weight exceeded the calculation. Stress accumulated gradually, and the entire structure fell. It actually killed 75 workers. The lesson was universal. If your structure is misaligned with your environment, failure isn't a surprise, it's a natural outcome. And masculinity works in the same way. Let's look at masculinity like an engineer would. We can define 4 components: inputs, internal architecture, processing structure, and outputs. Let's look at inputs. Inputs are stress, responsibilities, relationships, uncertainties, self-expectations, financial pressure, family dynamics. Then we have internal architecture, boundaries, personal rules, values hierarchy, load-bearing habits, emotional damping mechanisms, decision-making structure, stability mechanisms. If the architecture is weak or it's undefined, then the inputs will overwhelm the system. The third one was the processing structure. So how do you interpret pressure? How do you regulate emotion? How you plan? How you adjust under uncertainty? And then finally, we have outputs. These are the confidence, the direction, the consistency, the composure, the follow-through, the leadership energy. And here is a key point. Most people try to fix outputs, but outputs are not something you work on. They're the results of your design, of your structure and your boundaries, of your habits and your processing, of your environment. In other words, outputs are who you become when the system is built correctly. Whenever we need to solve anything, we always start with a problem definition. Most men define problem incorrectly. I'm weak. I'm not masculine enough. I need more confidence. I need more discipline. These are identity labels. They're not engineering definitions. A better question is, what part of my internal structure collapses under load? In other words, where do I break when life becomes heavy? I'd like you to use three-step engineering model and ask yourself. Step number one, what is failing? Examples are my emotional regulation collapses during conflict. My decision making becomes chaotic under uncertainty. I lose consistency when my routines break. In other words, which systems stop working when pressure rises? Step number two, under what load does it fail? These are examples like financial uncertainty, parenting pressures, relationships tensions, isolation, unstructured environment. In other words, when exactly does the collapse occur? And step number three, what proves the failure? What are the evidence? So, examples can be withdrawal, emotional spikes, oscillations, broken commitments, avoidance. In other words, what does the failure look like in real life? Once you can answer this, then you can start rebuilding yourself. That rebuilding process becomes possible because without it, you don't have a clearly defined problem, and therefore, any objectives you set for yourself can take you places where you never wanted to go to in the first place. In previous videos, we looked at three personas. We looked at the overloaded father, the partner who loses stability in conflict, the directionless 20-year-old man. In this video, in the interest of time, we'll zoom in on the directionless early 20s, 25-year-old man, because this is the group that's mostly overwhelmed today and the one that receives some of the worst advice. In this group, the failure mode, we defined it as oscillations, inconsistency, zero forward motion. The load conditions are that there is too much freedom, that there are no constraints, there is no defined architecture. The correct problem definition is my internal structure is undefined. My energy has no load paths. In simple words, I don't have rails in my life. Everything feels possible, so nothing actually happens. So, as promised, let's turn this into a simple four-part blueprint. Something easy to remember. Structure, load ratings, damping and boundaries, and feedback loops. This isn't about becoming masculine. The goal is to build an internal system that produces masculinity outputs automatically, like a version 1.0 of your own operating system. The structure. This is where you build a simple skeleton. At 25-year-old, the biggest issue for a lot of men is that the architecture is not broken, it's simply not built yet. Most young men say, I don't know my purpose. If that's you, here's the good news. You don't need a grand purpose right now. What you need is constraints. Just like you need a frame before you add motors, sensors, cooling, or logic when you're building a robot, you need a basic backbone before you can add discipline and confidence. Your backbone is made of four simple pieces: daily anchor, roughly when you wake up, minimum routine, one block of movement per day, two rules, something that's non-negotiable that apply every single day, and responsibility order, a simple priority list. I'd like to go through some examples here. So every individual is going to be different, but I do believe that this can at least guide you through the process and help you understand the approach towards building your own blueprint. So in this case, your wake window should be always non-negotiable. It's between 7 and 8 a.m. That's your anchor. You always need to exercise, so 30 to 45 minutes of physical training or walking. And have two rules: no phone for the first hour, And don't break promises you make to yourself as a rule number two. And then you need to have responsibility order. In this case, number one would be health, number two is skill acquisition, number three is income stability, and number four is social integrity. This is not you being disciplined. This is simply installing a load bearing frame. The second one is load ratings. Without load ratings, everything feels too much. In engineering, every component has a max load, a safe load, and a fatigue limit. You need the same awareness. You need to understand what your weaknesses are. So ask yourself, how many hours of social time can I handle before I feel drained? How much work stress can I hold before I get sloppy? How much unstructured time can I have before I start drifting? Examples of self ratings can be I can only handle 3 to 4 hours of unstructured time per day before I start to spiral out of control. My decision making process collapses when I have way too many choices. And my emotional stability weakens at night. So any serious reflections should really happen earlier. Knowing this will let you design around your weak points instead of calling yourself lazy or undisciplined. Number three, these are your damping and boundaries. So remove oscillations. Most young men don't collapse because life is too heavy. They collapse because they have no damping and there is no boundaries in their life. In engineering, damping is what removes oscillation. In life, damping is what stops your emotional spikes, your overreaction, your avoidance, your paralysis under uncertainty. So here is a basic damping kit that worked for me. A simple breathing pattern, longer exhale, for example, 4 seconds exhale, a 30 seconds pause before answering in a conflict. Journaling is short bullets, you don't need essays. A weekly system reset where you review what went wrong. Basic boundary kit can be no relationship that destroy my sleep, no saying yes out of guilt, no starting the day without at least a basic plan. You see, boundaries protect your structure and damping protect your stability inside that structure. Number four are feedback loops. At 25, you don't need perfection. What you need is visibility. Feedback loops turn chaotic life into an engineering problem you can improve week by week. Once a week, ask yourself, what failed this week? Under what load did it fail? What proved the failure? How did it show up in real life? What is one small reinforcement or redesign I can apply next week? This is where identity stops being something you chase and starts being an output of your system. Out of everything I mentioned, this one is crucial. This is the one that forces you to better understand yourself. This is you being accountable with yourself. Before we close, let me give you one more engineering example because it explains why so many men feel like they keep upgrading themselves, yet nothing truly changes. Imagine you're building a robot. Instead of starting with the fundamentals, the cooling system, the power regulation, the thermal design, the structural frame, you jump into installing a high performance processing chip because someone sold you on the latest and greatest tech. And if you just buy this, all of your problems are going to go away. And then for a moment, you buy it and you install it and it works. The robot moves faster, it reacts quicker, it feels like a breakthrough. But underneath it, blinded by all the new cool things that this robot can now do, with no cooling system, it overheats. With no stable power architecture, the voltage spikes, it destabilizes. With no solid frame, the components start to deform under load. The performance spike is real, no doubt about it, but it's very temporary. Eventually, the system fails. And now you face a familiar decision. Do you apply another band aid fix? Do you buy a repair kit that someone else now sells it to you? And do you keep repeating this cycle? Upgrade, overheat, fail, patch, repeat. Or do you stop, dismantle the system, and finally build the foundation you skipped? The chip was never really the problem. The missing architecture was. And this is exactly why most self development collapses. Men chase the shiny upgrade, the confidence hacks, the identity labels, the masculinity performance boosters. But without emotional cooling, without power stability, like sleep, health routines, without structural boundaries, internal logic, and values, without noise reduction, without feedback loops, every upgrade will eventually burn the system down. It is fun to install the chip. It's boring to build the cooling system, but only the boring work makes performance sustainable. Most people expect a silver bullet at the end of a video like this. But in engineering, there is no magic, only design iterations and refinement. And masculinity is the same. Your stability, confidence, and directions aren't built by force. They emerge from architecture, from the internal system you choose to build. And the work of designing yourself is actually fun. It's not in the dopamine hit motivational way, but in the way an engineer feels joy when a subsystem finally works as intended. It becomes rewarding when your sleep stabilizes your emotions, when your training stabilizes your confidence, when your rules stabilize your decisions, when your boundaries stabilize your relationships. And the fun is exponential because as subsystems link together, your life stops feeling random. It actually starts feeling designed, coherent, predictable under load. Most people chase the thrill of an output, confidence, discipline, direction. But nothing feels as good as watching the system you built produce those output on its own. That's the difference between performing masculinity and engineering masculinity. You are not trying to be someone, you are designing someone. And once the architecture is in place, the identity take care of itself. Thank you for watching, and until next time.